All right, I had to reshoot this twice because I rambled too much. But we're going to get into suspension geometry with this one. Hey guys, it's Kalos here, now P1R Kalos. Uh, Today's video, I know I don't put a lot out. Sorry about that. I just got burned out and I've been working on some other things. But today's video, I really want to update my tuning process and the suspension geometry and how I incorporate that. It's a big deal if you're on a wheel to get suspension geometry right. It makes a real difference in how you feel the car and being able to control it. I'll also update my force feedback settings. And for those of you, the first thing we'll actually dive into is a little bit of a health update. I know people have been ask me about it occasionally. There's good news, there's bad news. My mesothelioma cancer, yeah, it is what it is, and I'm living with it. So, without further ado, we're going to start off with the health update. Then I'll go into the force feedback, and then we'll go into the suspension geometry and updated process for tuning. Let's get into it. All right, let's talk a little bit about my health. If you watched my video last September, August, you may know that I have mesothelioma, terminal cancer. The good news, I had chemotherapy. I had surgery that was supposed to be a full pleurectomy. It kind of failed, but they did get 80% in the resection. And then I was on immunotherapy. And lo and behold, immunotherapy was working great. And this is the good news. I like literally, it shrunk my cancer, including a tumor between my heart and lungs, down to very minimal levels. That's the good news. The bad news is, yeah, the bad news is immunotherapy stopped working and also is potentially causing me other health issues. So we had to stop it. And the bad news is those are all the FDA approved treatments for mesothelioma. That means we're on to trials. So the good news is I have way less cancer than I did 18 months ago when I was diagnosed. The bad news is we're out of approved treatment options, and we're on to a clinical trial that did not get off to a good start. I had a massive allergic reaction to it. I have to keep EpiPen with me now, just in case. They reduce my dosage. And we're going to see how this trial works out. When we got a little bit of hope that it may work out pretty well. Also, I developed tuberculosis potentially from the mesothelioma. We're hoping as I get away from the immunotherapy, that starts to improve. Might be like microinflammation or just the body kind of attacking itself, which is one of the side effects of immunotherapy. The current treatment I'm on is not supposed to have a lot of side effects. I ended up being one of a few people that have had allergic reaction to it. So, yeah, it's fun. Good news is I'm in semi-decent health right now. And I'll be around for a little while. And my goal hasn't changed. I want to see my kids graduate high school, but there it is. I know how this is going to go eventually, and I've kind of made my peace with it. I've lived with it, and I've dealt with it. And on another note, some good news is my bucket list. Like people are like, well, do your bucket list, and I'm like, I don't care about a bucket list. I finally found something. One of the reasons I also haven't been doing many videos is I've changed gears. I have really been focused on getting accepted into graduate school, which I did for philosophy, and I will be attending Marquette University, barring health issues, in the fall to start working on my master's. Hopefully, I have time to finish it. I don't know. We'll give it a shot. That being said, the bad news and all that's out of the way. Let's get into talking a little bit about force feedback, and then onto kind of my tuning process for suspension, including suspension geometry and how you can make that work for you. Here we go. All right, guys, let's talk force feedback just for a little bit. I'm not going to go huge into detail here. You can watch my original force feedback video. I think I explained everything. Not a whole lot has changed, but I have made adjustments to my own settings. So if you want to be aware of like how I've adjusted my settings, I'll show you here in a little bit. I'll show you right now. So still like vibration at 15, does the same thing, gives you, anytime the tire starts losing traction, you get a little bit of vibration, you'll get a little bit under braking if you lock it up. I just want a little bit so I can tell it's there. Force feedback scale's the same, steering alignment's the same. Again, I make sure to use telemetry to show that I'm not clipping. But the big change for me, I say big, it's really minor. I went from 140 on the mechanical trail to 160. Like I said in the video, this is the primary thing you need in order to control the car. You don't need anything else. Pneumatic trail causes the wheel to go light whenever you lose traction on the front or rear wheels. It's very useful to know, but I lowered it to 50. I think I had it at 60. I just want enough information as it goes light to tell me that I'm losing a bit of traction. That's all I want. And if I can feel that little bit, then I don't need it very high. Also, I think I lowered the load sensitivity from, I just need enough so you can feel bumps and like hills, because it'll affect how the wheel feels as you over hills. Just enough in the suspension to let me know kind of what it's doing. It can be especially important over curbs, but I found too much overwhelmed the force feedback a little bit. The other thing I did is, if you remember correctly, I had a little bit of dynamic damper. I think I only had like damping at like 10 or 15, and then I had like 20 on the dynamic or 50 on the dynamic damper. I cut it off. Just from experience and watching, what it does is it shuts off the damper in certain situations, but it's like on off, on off, on off, and it was inhibiting my ability to feel the lightness from pneumatic trail. It just wasn't very effective. So I just found a damping level I liked, which is around 20, and I stick with that. I don't want it turning on and off. It'll just stay steady. It's low enough that it doesn't inhibit how quickly I turn the wheel. Road feel, I've only got it at 10. This is really an immersion thing. If you want more immersion, turn it up. If you want less, you don't want it interfering with your steering wheel. So turn it off if you don't want it. But it can cause a lot of jumps in the force feedback. It's just a little too much detail. I have had a chance, thanks to a friend, P1R Bunter, who just happens to live near me. He has a Logitech direct drive wheel with 11 newton meters of force. So I got a chance to use his, and I will say I was really surprised. This, theoretically, the CSLE only has 6, but I had to turn his up to 9 to get the same amount of force I felt in my wheel. I don't know what's going on there, but that's what it is. So, what I found is road feel he had it really high. And it definitely, if you hit the curbs, especially like a Road America, the rumble strips, it would cause your wheel to shake, and it would affect your steering. So I keep that just high enough that I can feel it, and it's really a personal preference there. I think that really about covers it. If you want to watch the full video that goes into full detail, you can find it in my channel. But this is what I use now, and what I'm most comfortable with. And I'm glad it just stays. I don't have to constantly fix it every time I turn on the game. Now they fix that bug. So that's my force feedback settings. If you want more details, watch the video. If you like to give these a try, go ahead. Let's go on the tuning. Hey, I had to reshoot this. I had 40 minutes of me rambling and repeating myself. So in order to cover the what I want to cover, I'm going to break it up into sections and try to keep myself as concise as possible. What I want to avoid, this is not a rehash of my previous video about tuning. This is adjustments I've made to my tuning since then. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, as you can see, I'm going to start with gearing. Just want to cover one point real quick. On my Ford GT, I have a 3.70. This is fine for the Ford GT, but if you're in a car like the Corvette C8R that tends to rev bounce, you rev it all the way out, you will lose time when you hit bumps and curbs. if you're near the top. So on cars like that, you'll want to run 6.1 for your gearing, and then do the rest of them off of that. Just kind of the way it is. It limits the rev bouncing and it keeps you from having to upshift too early. All right, let's talk anti-roll bars, because this is how I start my tuning process now. Almost every car, I set the 40 in the front, 1 in the rear. This gives me the most stable platform that I can adjust off of using the anti-roll under suspension geometry. I find that makes those adjustments a little more granular. This one's a 37.3. I have found, like on slow corners, cars that aren't twitchy, that tend to slow turn, like the Ford GT, I need the ARBs help if I go down a little in the front, up a little on the rear. The Porsche is another example where I'm like 35.5 instead of 37, like the 40 in 1. But for the most part, a lot of the cars I'm at 40 in 1, and I find I don't have too many issues with it. Springs and ride height. I tend to run really soft springs. That hasn't changed from my other video. You can run stiffer springs. You might get a car that's a little more responsive that way. I like to run them a little softer. Ride height, almost always as low as you can go. We can adjust other suspension things to keep that from being an issue. Let's talk about Aero. If you're in a GT car, you're going to run full front and as low as you can go on the rear. We're going to use suspension geometry to sort the car out, but I find the fastest way to go is full front, minimum rear. DPI cars are a little different. They don't tend to lose as much speed running a lot of high rear aero, and it really helps those cars with cornering. So DPI cars tend to be almost full front and rear. Depending on the DPI car, like the Orca, you might go a little lower in the rear just because it has so much you don't want to understeer at high speeds. If you are on a wheel, steering lock range, I tend to run around 70 now. Some cars, like the BMW M8, I keep at around 80. Others, I'll run a little lower. I think the Merc I have at 67. I think Porsche maybe 65. This is generally where I run them, though, close to 70 now. I find, especially with the way Forza gives you a lot of like snap oversteer if somebody hits you, not having to turn the wheel all the way over to catch a slide, being able to just like, whoa, got it, and come back. And I find it's easier to catch that way. Oh, DPI cars, I'll run like 50. They don't want to turn. Well, most of them don't want to turn unless you run it pretty low. My degree of rotation is still 900. All right, I'm out on track for this one because I want to show you the telemetry. We're going to talk tire pressures and, all right, I got to get there, right? We're going to talk tire pressures and camber, right? So I've made adjustments. I want a quick and dirty way of getting my camber and tire pressures. I could even do it by track, but this one's still set at negative 1.5, negative 1.2 for Road America. But basically, I don't know, I'll kind of point. If you look at the, say, the top left, the inner and outer temperatures, I just do my normal tire pressures as low as I can go, and I just compare the inner and outer. The middle is going to be low because in Forza, the lower you go until you start losing, the better, and that always leaves the middle low. But instead of like trying to get it all even, I just compare the inner and the outer. Now with in terms of tire pressures, basically I'll go as low as I can go until I start losing traction. So if I'm going lower on the front and I start understeering because I've gone too low and it doesn't provide traction, I'll raise it back up. On the rear, if I start oversteering because I'm reducing it, I'll raise it back up. And then I'll kind of lower them in tandem just to get a feel for what the quickest lap time is. And that's how I set camber. The inner and outer, some corners you might find your outer gets a little high, say like the kink at Road America. That's fine. You're gonna have to compromise. In fact, at the kink in Road America, I want a little bit of instability in the rear because I want to be able to slide it out in order to get the right angle going through the kink. For dampers, I have a little video at the end showing where I set it, Eau Rouge and Radeon. I freeze frame it. And mostly I run dampers, my bump a little higher now than I used to. Rebound, I don't run all the way out. I find that in 8.5 to 10 range is generally, I'll play around it with the car, and that's until I get it feeling right. It's one of the last things I do, but just for a baseline, I'll set it around 9. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video, and this is what makes it way different than what I do with the other tuning video where I barely touch suspension geometry. I didn't understand what it did at the time, and I didn't really touch it that much. So let's get into it. We're going to go into tuning car, and we are going to go over here to, not brake pressure, suspension geometry. As you can see, I'm no longer at 0-0 with this car. 7.5 in the front, 4.1 in the rear. Anti-roll is massive. What I find is that the front anti-roll, it's kind of like bump stops. If you go lower, the car will initially turn in, but you'll get less force feedback, and then it'll settle. And then it won't give you as much. What I find is a higher anti-roll with the force feedback tends to want to drag the rear around. It tends to point the car where your input is going. So based on how hard the force feedback is. So I tend to run mine pretty high. This is not considering the rear at this point, just how well it points. A good way to think about it is going in corner entry, different type of corner entries. So if you're at 50 brake balance and you're not worried about getting optimal trail braking, you just want to know how the car feels, how much it follows you as you're going into the corner. This is kind of how I set my front center roll. And I'll do that first. I'll get it to where I want it. And then I'll set the rear at a base point. Like usually it's like 5 to 6, anywhere from 4.5 to 6. At Ford GT is a little higher. With the rear, however, I will want it to, I'll just set it to like 2 or 3 to start with, and then I'll start raising or lowering it based on the car. Some cars are very twitchy, like the Audi, so I'll have a really high front anti-roll and a really low, like almost 0 rear anti-roll. What the rear does is it makes it so, if you watch my other video on the quote-unquote pro tunes from Nalac 28, and I said his tune with a 9.8 rear was like on rollers, it just kind of wanted to, wherever I pointed it, the car went. And it was too much, like just the tiniest little input made it like slide around because it was just over rotating so much. But if I could keep the control of it, but I was on edge, it would go where I wanted to go. So this is about finding your comfort level of the force feedback. Like I just didn't get the force feedback I needed from it at that point. So what I do is I set the front, which makes the car pointy, and I tend to go a little higher. And then I raise the rear until the car rotates the way I want it to. And at some point, it'll rotate too much. And at that point, it's following your inputs a little too harshly. And that's at the point I'll bring it back, and I find the right medium where I want it, where the balance of that is, where the car goes where I want it to be pointed. All right. Next, anti-dive. Hope that all made sense. You can set it a lot. Let's go back to anti-roll. You can set it a lot of different ways. You could actually go lower on the rear and keep the center around 0, and that'll cause a car that'll turn in pretty quickly and then settle. And you could build around that. I don't like that. I don't think it works well with a wheel. So this is the way I go. Anti-dive. Anti-dive, think of it almost like brake balance. See, in Forza, when you move the brake balance up or down 1%, it's a big jump. So, 1% could be too much one way or the other, going from oversteering to understeering under braking. What anti-dive does is if you raise it, it keeps the weight on the rear, keeps it from all going to the front, kind of like ARBs for the front and the back, so that the rear maintains a bit of traction. So if you find that you're oversteering, you don't necessarily need to lower the brake balance. You can lower the anti-dive. Boom, boom, boom. Do it a few percentage points. See how it goes. And I find that's the way I really get the balance of how I like to brake. Now, you could go lower than 50 on your brake balance and maybe raise it a little bit. You'll find the right balance that works for you for trail braking. As you're coming off the brakes, the car will want to rotate. This will kind of determine how much it rotates. So finding your comfort level with that. Anti-squat. I use this in combination with the Excel differential. So we go over to Excel. You notice I don't run 69. It's a little higher on the Ford. I find the Ford's very controllable with the way I have it set up. So a little bit of locking is okay, but I run a lot of cars 60 to 65. I think the Acura I actually run into the high 50s. And the reason for that is there's a point where you go from it, if you're got too much throttle, it'll want to spin the inner rear if it's too low. If it's too high, it'll spin both tires and you got snap oversteer. When it's too low, spinning in the rear, you get understeer. Obviously, you don't really want either of them, but you want to be on the edge of that. So I find if I can get it to the point where the inner starts spinning up and then it both lock, that's the point where I find it most controllable under the throttle when I'm kind of at the limit when I'm getting on the power. So that's how I set the Excel, and why that's important is because I'm not going to use the Excel to get more oversteer on throttle. I find it too snappy if I go up too high. This is what brings us back to anti-squat. When I run higher anti-squat. A lot of people, they want the car to be as stable on throttle as possible, so they really lower the anti-squat. In some cars I do, like the M8, especially at low speeds, just really squirmy under throttle. So I'll run a negative on that, like -5 to -10. But most cars, I'm actually above 0. This one I'm at 10. Like the Porsche, I'm all the way at 40, because that's how I was able to get it to finally rotate under the throttle. But this is the on throttle oversteer and understeer that I'm adjusting is with the anti-squat instead of using the Excel. So I'll rate, if I need more on power oversteer, I'll raise it. If I need less on power oversteer, if I need to be more stable, I'll lower it. And it really gives me kind of a granular control over how much of it I want, how much of it I can handle myself. So you could say you tried my tune, and I was just talking about suspension geometry, and you found it just too loose. I've had people tell me my cars are a little too loose for them. I mean, you can do something simple, like, oh, it's too pointy, so I'll lower the anti-roll. Or the rear rotates just too much in general, I'll lower the rear anti-roll. Or you can say, oh, it just, when I'm braking, it just squirms on me too much. Then you could raise the anti-dive. Or you can say understeer is too much. Yeah, like I like hard braking. If I lock up, it tends to just understeer on me. In that case, lower it so that the rears get a little looser under braking. And then with anti-squat, say it's too oversteery for you when you put on the power. Maybe you're really heavy on the throttle. I tend to be pretty heavy, but I also keep my gearing higher lots of times. But you're really heavy on the throttle and you like to downshift and just really keep it in the RPM range. Lower the anti-squat so you have less on power oversteer. So I hope this helps you. You can take my other tuning video and take what I talk about here and then apply that to your own tunes or other tunes I've put out to help you really get under control. This is suspension geometry really brings the force feedback in the cars alive and makes them really controllable for getting the slip angle and kind of maximizing exactly how much oversteer and understeer and what parts of the corner you want it. So hope that helps you. I'll do a little quick thing on dampers and Eau Rouge, and then I got some videos that are just lap examples for different tracks that I set in multiplayer, so I got the like super rubbered in effect. Not necessarily the perfect ideal conditions, especially Brands Hatch. Also, the video on Brands Hatch shows why I had the track limits and the braking line on, because it was overcast and it was so dark I could barely see the track. Then you got to fix the lighting in this game, seriously, because I would totally run without the track limits and the braking line on if I didn't have those situations. But hope you enjoy those. Hope you found this helpful, and have a good one. Halos out. This is where I set my bump, and I'll freeze frame at the moment I need to. You're going to need to be able to handle this right here. Theoretically, you can take a Rouge Radion flat. I do right here. You got to go really left. You're hitting all the curb. You're hitting the grass. You're going downhill into an uphill. Just really unsettles the car. This is where you set your bump. Raise your bump until you can handle this section of Eau Rouge. And once you can handle it comfortably without the car bouncing all over the place, be aware you might need to still lift if you're on 50 rubber or you're not a fully rubbered track. But theoretically, a lot of the cars can take this flat, even when the track is fully rubbered in free play and in multiplayer online. So that's why I'm running my bump like 3.5 or higher, even upwards of 4.5. For a general multiplayer tune, if you can handle a Rouge Radion, you should be good for most tracks with your bump. 21.
Till race start.